Siema, witam na moim kanale. Jeżeli nie subskrybujesz jeszcze mojego kanału, zachęcam Cię do kliknięcia subskrypcji, zachęcam Cię do kliknięcia dzwoneczka, aby być stale na bieżąco oraz zapraszam do używania moich kodów na stronie Muscle Power, aby zaoszczędzić 10% na całe zakupy suplementacyjne w kraju i za granicą oraz na propeptydy.pl, również z wysyłką za granicę. Zapraszam do oglądania.
Hello and welcome back with the podcast with Kikel, the part number 2. Basically, last time we talked about the off-season and all of the stuff that's mainly we should focus on in the off-season. And actually today we're gonna talk more about the competition prep, because this like the stuff that messes with the head the most with all of the people, especially if someone coaching himself. So people like Alex actually can be pretty handle or even sometimes necessary when it comes to contest prep. First of all, thank you for coming back to the podcast, Alex. I know you have crazy busy schedule, so I'm really glad you like the last time and you come back.
I did, man. It was a lot of fun, and it's an honor for me to come on because we just clicked really well, and I like talking with people that you just have fun talking. Like if you can sit down and say, I'd hang out with that person outside of like this conversation, I want to have those conversations more, and you're that kind of person. So thank you for having me back on.
Yeah, actually, I noticed the same. Actually, I was really scary before we started the podcast the first time, but when we started to talk, it was like feel pretty normal.
Yeah, and honestly, that's how I like to do all of my content, any podcast. It's like you don't have notes, you just go and start the conversation. And at least from my perspective, you kind of know what you're doing. Like for you, you know the off season, you know contest prep, you've been through both, so you know the questions to ask. Me, I've done them both personally with clients, all that fun stuff. So if I don't know my stuff by now, having a page full of notes isn't going to help me. So
Yeah.
back and forth, just having the conversation, it always makes for better education. Well, people don't pick up on if you're reading like a textbook, but if you're thinking about it and hearing it like a conversation, like you would at a coffee shop, all of a sudden learning becomes a whole lot easier.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. Okay, so let's start from the transitions from the off season to the contest preps. Every coach just likes to have some time that he work with. So sometimes people do the contest prep in 8 weeks, sometimes 12 weeks, 16 weeks is probably the most that most people take to the consideration. Like it's like a perfect spot, 16 weeks. But sometimes some coaches like to have even longer time with clients. Let's say that you have a client that you work with for about a year. You basically know how his body works, plus minus, because you never actually prep them, but you came with him with all of his off season, so you know something about him. So how long you like to prep your clients for the show?
So, as you know from our previous conversation, I'm going to answer that, but first I have to get to other things first because we have to make sure everyone's on the same page. I'm a big fan of having phases that I call marinating phases. Someone used that term a really long time ago, and I can't remember who it was. I think I used to be big posting on the forums and everything, and someone used the term marinating, and I loved it. So this is the phase in between where you're gaining muscle tissue and losing fat, so off-season contest prep, where you're just holding that body weight for an extended period of time, owning that body weight, getting good at breathing at that body weight, is really making all those deep-sea nuclear changes. So those are the things that we like to refer to as muscle memory. Excuse me. So these are the things that are going to ensure that long-term, that's your new homeostatic set point. So we're trying to marinate there at a certain phase, let's say the peak of your off season. You stay there and you just slowly get bigger, get stronger, and get leaner at that same body weight. A marinating phase could be 8 to 12 weeks. It doesn't have to be necessarily that long, but the longer you can do it, the better. So ideally, I would like to have kind of off-season marinating phase of some little portion, and then we go into contest prep. It's funny you mentioned time frames and durations for preps. In the natural bodybuilding world, they can be upwards of 20 to 30 weeks, which is crazy, but that's natural. In the enhanced world, if you're looking at traditional male and females that are enhanced, if they're starting off in good shape, you should be ready in about 10 to 12 weeks. Usually a 12-week prep is pretty much par for the course, and everyone has more than enough time. If someone is not ready, then maybe, like you said, about 16 weeks. But in general, 12 weeks should do it. So when I say you should be ready, you should, as a male, have some separation everywhere, have a little bit of vascularity everywhere. It's going to look differently depending on the person, but you shouldn't look sloppy. If you do look a little bit sloppy as a male or female, then obviously you need to add a longer duration to that. You can also do something in terms of doing 8 weeks of actual dieting, maybe like 4 weeks off, so usually 12 weeks, and the final 4 weeks of actual preps. You can have a mini growth phase in there as well, depending on what the pharmacology looks like. You do it a bunch of different ways, but in general, you're right. It's about 12 to 16 weeks, depending on the person.
Okay, let's back quickly to the holding phase, as that's something that's actually interesting me. When you do this phase with your clients, you actually lowered the PEDs, or it's like a something like a bridge or TRT phase, or you don't do anything like that before the show?
Yep. So your mind's on the right track. So since we're getting ready to blast androgens throughout contest prep, we want to have a period of time where we're getting healthier. So androgens are going to be the things that are going to cause more of a systemic burden on your organs. So we want androgens lower. So that would be like an athletic HRT like we talked about before. But guess what? Peptides don't bring about the same amount of systemic organ stress, again, like we talked about before. So this looks like, androgens coming down and peptides going up. Bring in some other players. Maybe you need like mitochondrial aid because your aerobic work isn't that good. You could bring in something like GW 50, 15, 16. You could do all these other players, even a low dose T4 in the background. From a deodenase enzymatic aspect, you can drive up some good muscle plasticity-based changes from just adding that in during this marinating phase. So this phase would basically look like low to moderate, basically cruising androgens, and then play with everything else. So that you start prep, pretty much need to drop everything else, bring up the androgens, and slowly layer things back in as you go throughout prep. That's where your clenbuterols, your thyroids, and things like that would come in.
Yeah, and what about the training and the diet in this phase, actually?
So training is going to always follow our myocyte maturation model that we covered in the first video.
Okay.
That's basically a rinse, wash, repeat based thing. And the only thing you need to do is change your volumes and loads and overall burden on your body based on where you're at. So if you're getting towards the end of a contest prep and you just can't load heavy for whatever reason, you got to make that up with volume. If it's the opposite, you could load heavy, but you burn out quick and maybe pull down the volume. So you're always focusing on what your body's doing now. Just because last prep did something differently does not mean it's not going to be how it's going to operate now. So we're focusing on the now, not versus what happened. We can build up some notes in the background. So training is always kind of cyclical in nature, always trying to progress in some fashion. It's not progressive overload in the sense that always add load to the bar, but it could be getting an extra rep. It could be doing lower rest periods. It could be some way to progress. So if we're always doing that with our training from a nutritional aspect, we would preferentially like to hold food here as long as we can. So wherever you built your food up to, it's just kind of staying there and you're marinating. You're literally trying to not increase your intake as much, but you're trying to drive up anabolism and some background beta oxidation as well, pretty substantially. Because remember, mTOR, so muscle protein synthesis and beta oxidation, they're not calorically dependent. So whether you're in a caloric surplus or a deficit does not mean you're doing one or the other. Both of them can be driven in both situations. So that means you can plan your day accordingly to have periods of the day where you're trying to focus on beta oxidation, fat loss, and periods of the day where you're trying to focus on anabolism, muscle building.
Okay. So we covered the time frame from the contest prep. We covered the training, the changes in the training in the contest prep. There's actually nothing's changed, basically. So now we have to cover the style of getting into the cutting phase, because some do the rapid cut in the calories. So like let's say it's 3 to 4 weeks of the real big deficits just to start the engine, let's say, going, and then they up the calories and maybe lowers the cardio, and some do it very, very slowly. How's your approach to this?
So I think I have to compare naturals to enhanced, because if you read any...
Let's talk about enhanced athletes.
Oh, yeah, no.
Yeah.
I'm saying it for a specific reason. You'll get it in a second. So anyone who reads a nutrition book out there on how to diet they'll say, whatever, drop 500 calories. You have to make that kind of bigger drop every single time. We're looking at natural biology and how people like to diet over there, which is different than enhanced. When we look at the enhanced world, and this is why I'm bringing it up, it's extremely different. You have an initial change and modulation with that first change to make sure your body realizes, oh, we're trying to favor a more hypocaloric environment. We're trying to favor beta oxidation. But after that, the changes are very minute and small. So let's just say randomly, a large male is starting his contest prep. Maybe we do pull 500 calories from extra fats and maybe some glucose because we're basically keeping nitrogen the same. And then after that, every week, if he needs a change to nutrition, we're pretty much dropping like 25 grams of carbs. You're dropping anywhere from 50 to 100 calories because in the enhanced world, those calories aren't doing everything they're doing in the natural world. In the enhanced world, remember, we're driving metabolism because we're taking our drugs and beta oxidation at the same time. So because you're constantly recomping as an enhanced athlete, those changes are going to be very different than the natural counterpart. It's also very important to note that, again, it's not just always the nutrition that's changing. If you're bringing in Clenbuterol and up in your cardio, you don't need to touch the food at all. So you have these three variables of drugs, nutrition, and cardio to switch from and basically choose from. So you're going through each week and finding what the rate limiting factor is. Is it the fact that this person just isn't doing a great job on the aerobic side of things and they just need to be more fit? Okay, we're going to change cardio. Is it the fact that they are liberating? Because if you look at fat loss, a lot of people are getting lost on the end beta oxidation standpoint. So they're liberating fat, they're putting it in the bloodstream, but they're not burning it off. It's just going off and being repartitioned and restored somewhere else. So in that case, if that's the person, then okay, we just need to bring in some Clenbuterol to drive up more of that sympathetic activity to burn off more actual fat in mitochondria. If it's, and you just go down the list of what's causing the rate limiting factor for that standpoint. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Definitely. Okay. Now I get it. That makes sense totally.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we have in the enhanced world, just to recap really quick for everyone, big drop initially and then smaller changes after that. And then if you do hit a big plateau, sometimes another big drop is needed. But over in the natural world, it's usually bigger drops less frequently. In the enhanced one, it's big drop initially and then slower pulling off of that because we're taking drugs that are driving metabolism and that are driving fat loss.
Okay, as what about the cardio in the contest prep? You starting with a huge amount of cardio on the beginning, or you like it increases very, very slowly?
So if someone were working with me carrying off the last video, we would have basically aerobic work fairly moderate year round. To me, it's not really a dieting tool. Everyone likes to use it to just expend calories, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But I would rather use it to drive specific factors, not just driving overall caloric burning. But if we're taking a PBO walk outside, we talked about that before, that photonic exchange from the sun is doing all the cool uncoupling things at your liver to drive up more positive actual transmission. So drug docking into receptor, sending its signal and going somewhere else to dock to a different receptor. That walk outside is driving anabolism because you're getting the sun exposure. At the same point, if you're nasal breathing on that walk, you're getting better at handling carbon dioxide. And guess what? That's coming off as those carbon change and you're breathing it out as carbon dioxide. So that walk is anabolic and lipolytic. So that walk you just took is causing you to build muscle tissue and lose fat. So in my world, to me, those should always be in, whether you're in the off season or contest prep, you should always be doing your cardio.
How many sheets your clients get back from you when you write to them the plan?
It's a lot.
Yeah, because this is actually a lot of thinking here. Yeah,
Yeah.
but you basically cover everything, so they don't have to think about anything. So.
And that's exactly it. And for me, I don't just want to tell people, just do this. I want to explain it so there's actually some validity behind why we're doing this. Because, yeah, you could look at the 1,000 transformation plus pictures I posted, but at the end of the day, like, you should also be able to explain yourself. If anyone out there has a coach and you say, why are we doing this? They should be able to have a reason. Even if sometimes it's always my gut's just telling me that's a fine answer. That's a reason because they have the experience. But 95% of the other times, it should be this specific reason. It's just explaining it so we know why we're doing something.
Yeah, the Cruzacito is the perfect example of just because I feel that. Yeah.
and that's the thing. The dude has very low base knowledge, but so much experience that it doesn't matter. So he has the knowledge, but he just can't explain it, but he knows how it works. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. I freaking love the dude. I think I talked to him once or twice. He always seemed like a super nice guy, but that's exactly it. As long as every coach out there, by the way, let me just say this for everyone. There are so many ways to get from A to Z, to get to that end goal. We all have our different methods, so it's all through our different lenses. So whether you like someone who explains things like me, whether you like someone who doesn't explain things like Aceto, whether you like someone who does whatever, every coach can get you that end result if they're a good coach. It's just through many different ways.
Yeah, I've always talked to the people that you should click very well with your coach, and that's more important sometimes than the knowledge, because the knowledge comes with the time. But when you're not getting good with your coach, it's actually a waste of time. Because
completely agree. I 1000% agree with that. And I think in this world of bodybuilding, coaches should be doing more to lift each other up instead of breaking each other down. People like to think that, oh, you stole my client, or if I promote this guy, he's going to take clients away from me. How many people are on this earth? Just think about that. Like, could you ever work with all of them? Of course not. I couldn't work with all of them. No one can. So there's more than enough clients to share and spread around. It should be really trying to build each other up and say, this coach is like biomechanic wise, I'm not that proficient. I look at things more from like a gravity perspective and more from just a different perspective than a lot of other people. So that side of biomechanics, there's people out there that are way better than me. And that's why I'll send people to them, because they're better than me at that. And so it's just finding the right person that meshes well with you. I'm very heavy on the pharmaceutical and biochemistry side of things because that's me. I love the cellular stuff. I like being involved in people's lives, and I like having a relationship with my clients. Some people just need a taskmaster. That's not me. So go to someone else who can do that. And it's not that there's anything wrong with that. It's just find the coach you click with, go with that. Sorry for that.
Yeah, that's really important thing to say, just because sometimes people think that if you choose a coach, you have to stick with them to the rest of your life, and that's not the case. Actually, sometimes I rather that to someone says to me, I want to try something different, and be just like a human nature, just to say goodbye and shake hands, and that's okay. But I don't like the situations that you hear from your clients that he's actually not satisfied, but he like afraid to tell you that he wanted to abandon you. So it's like it's a mess. It's a mess. It's people don't do this. Don't do this. Just speak with your coach like with a normal human being, and we're gonna be fine. Trust me. Okay, so how the PEDs change in the off season? Because actually, every coach in some moment gonna change the more androgenics to the more anabolic stuff. So that's normal. Like sometimes people say is that drier compounds. Everyone knows what the drier compounds is, so we're not gonna take in that to the count, because probably everyone knows. But if you do it from the beginning of the prep or in the end of the prep, and what's the moment that you introduce the orals?
Gotcha. So lots to unpack there. First of all, again, through my lens and how I see things and how I like to do things, I take care of fluid retention during peak week. So as the coach, you need to have a good enough eye, or if you're coaching yourself, to see what's fluid, what's fat. If it's fat, you pull back the skin on your abs. It's very dense and granular. Those are literally fat cells. If it's soft and mushy, like kind of jump up and down, you see it move like an ocean, that's going to be fluid. So it's very apparent to any coach out there who's seen a lot of physiques over the years. So if you can see what's fluid and what's fat, and you know you're taking care of fluid during peak week, then as you lose body fat, where's all this fluid stored? It's basically going to be stored in adipocytes. You have all this muscle tissue that's surrounded by all this fat. These adipocytes will lose. So as we're losing body fat, these adipocytes, so fat cells, dump out their stores, get refilled with fluid first. They get refilled with fluid, and that's when you look flat and kind of watery. After they dump out their contents, that's when the fat cell actually shrinks, and that's when you actually look your leanest. So if you understand that paradigm, it doesn't matter what you look like really from a fluid retention standpoint until actual peak week. That being said, you need to make sure you know that you're losing body fat and not just kind of guessing. So you have to have that eye first and foremost. So for me, drug selection is always just based on need, just like in the off season. So during contest prep, you can ask your clients or yourselves these questions. Are you the skinny guy who just flattens out like crazy? We're probably going to need to bring in some nandrolone, whether that be NPP or DECA. If you are the fatter guy who just, you know what, you're really fat, you still have a lot of fluid, you flux water so much more crazy, maybe you would bring in like the Mastrons or the Primos, the DHBs or things like that. So to me, it's more based on need first and foremost. And then as you get closer to competition and to the stage, this is where it does change. The final 4 to 6 weeks, this is where we bring in our orals. So at about 6 weeks out, depending on the oral, that's when we would bring things in. I like that duration of time because if we compare injectables to orals, injectables are going to give you much more bang for your buck on the positive and less negative side effects. Orals are awesome, but they're fast acting, rapid, and come with a lot more attention, which is good and bad. So they're going to put more downward pressure on your renal system, your hepatic system, things like that, which for 6 weeks, not that bad. But you do that for 8 weeks, 12 weeks, it just kind of adds up. So at about 6 weeks, we want to bring in our orals, and this is where we base it off that person. So this is where you look at that person or even look at previous contest preps that they've done and see, okay, on show day, what was their issue? It's going to be one of two things. They were either never full enough, and therefore they didn't show off the actual striations and muscle bellies that they did have, or over here, they were not dry enough and they didn't have that textural change to the skin. So if we're looking for the fullness component, that would be something like an Anavar, or something like an Anadrol rather, something like a Superdrol. If we're looking more for the dryness component, that would be more something like your halotestins, your Winstrals, things like that. Superdrol is weird, can actually be branched off into 2, but that's more of like the final couple weeks, like 3 to 4 weeks maybe. Anadrol will be brought in at about 6 weeks. Winstrol will be brought in about 6 weeks. Halotestin is for the final 10 days to change the actual structural textural components of the skin. So Halo, again, is very neurologically active and does bring about a little bit more burden on organ systems. So that's only the final 10 days. But in general, 6 week out, see, is it a fullness problem or a skin texture problem? And then go about bringing those. So Anadrol is going to drive up that intramuscular tension extremely well, and it's all going to be intramuscular. If there's anything subcutaneous, it's not that Anadrol is bringing that much extra fluid, it's that you're not fluxing it properly. So what that means is you have to get leaner. That's all that really means. If you're someone who takes Anadrol and you feel like you get very watery, it's generally not an actual water problem, even though it potentially could be. It's usually just that's pushing out on the skin more, so you're seeing the fluid a little bit easier. And then the Winstrol component is awesome because it actually manages some inflammatory factors and some proteins at a very deep-seated level. It's C2, I forget the other numbers and letters after that, but there's a specific inflammatory protein that it modulates and changes that actual texture of the skin. So as you get closer to the stage, you see all the separations and the fluid kind of goes away and it looks like just carved out of stone. So you're basically going through one of those two camps. And then at the end, again, the final 10 days, if you need more of that textural change, bring in another Halo, or you can play around with some other things. But in general, that's how we're looking at starting things off at. And really quickly, I've talked about this a lot before, and this is why I cover in my mentoring program a lot, but we're looking at pharmacokinetics and dynamics. So how can we modulate these drugs to get more action out of them? So if we understand how these orals are broken down in our body, we basically take a tablet, they're mainly hard-pressed tablets, we swallow it, it goes down into our actual GI tract, interacts with gastric fluids, gets broken down, passes through these epithelial cell walls, gets over into the liver, into the circulatory system, gets pumped back into the circulatory system, and then up into the heart. From there, it gets dispersed and it reaches systemic circulation. So if we understand that's how an oral is metabolized, how can we get more out of that? Because it's not like an injectable compound that pretty much is non-genomically and genomically taken care of. An oral compound, if you want to potentiate the effects of that, look at food sciences. So if you can get the pill to sit there for a longer time in your stomach, interact with more gastric fluids, you can increase passive diffusion. Passive diffusion is going to change interior hydrophobic concentrations. Guess what that's going to do? It's going to equate in a higher peak plasma concentration. So if you were to do this, all of a sudden, the 50 milligram Anadrol tablet is going to act like a 75 milligram Anadrol tablet because you're getting more action out of that drug because you're driving passive diffusion rates and your body is able to get every bit out of it that it can. So this is really cool because it's super simple. Guess what you do? You literally add one whole egg. What's in the whole egg? There's the choline factor, there's the essential fatty acids, and there's the nitrogen component. On top of that, what's going to happen is that now that you're taking the 50 milligram Anadrol tablets working like a 75 milligram Anadrol tablet, that gap is going to increase protein folding. Protein folding is the thing that if you get misfolded proteins, you run into organ-based problems, and protein misfolding happens everywhere, but you can correct that with, guess what? TUDCA, a little 250 milligram tablet. So if you would literally take your oral with a whole egg and a 250 milligram tablet of TUDCA, it's going to correct for the increased protein folding rates, and all of a sudden you're getting more positive action out of that oral tablet. So in this way, we can start and slowly just keep that in throughout the prep so we can take less total orals in order to get more total action. So I talked a lot there. I'll stop for a second.
You know what you just do?
What's that?
In the summer, in every store, eggs are going to sold out.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, A-blends, give me a cut of that. I'll get the royalty off of it.
Yeah, remember to buy the good ones. The
Yeah,
cage-free omega-3.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, but those little things, that's why I'm so big into the biochemistry and pharmaceutical side of things, because I'm coming in from a pharmaceutical background, more looking at kinetics and dynamics and how these drugs are used in medical populations and clinical settings. You blend that and mesh that with athletes, and all of a sudden you're wondering, wow, with my insulin shots, I should be taking a little bit of sodium and a little bit of chromium, because those are the two rate limiting factors. So every insulin shot that you take, if you take those two things, you're abolishing the first two main rate limiting factors, and you're going to get more action out of that drug. So, and you can do this with so many different drugs. I'm going off on a tangent here because I'm getting really excited. I got to slow my speech down. When I get excited, I start to speak faster. But either way, that's just a little tangent off on the orals. But orals basically start at about 4 to 6 weeks out, and then you're most likely increasing into show day.
Okay. Okay, let's talk about a little bit about the GH, because that's the that's like your main topic, rather than injectable l-carnitine, of course. Do you think the more is more during the contest prep, or not exactly?
Not exactly. So kind of like we talked about in the first video, where you do want to work it up until you start seeing negative side effects, and then pull back and stay where you're not getting negative side effects. In prep, it gets skewed because you're getting healthier, or rather, you're not getting healthier, you're getting more athletic. You're improving on your energetics, so your HRV is going up. What that means is you're changing fluid dynamics. So all of a sudden, before you were taking 6 IUs of growth hormone, and then you got carpal tunnel, now you can probably take 8, and then you're not going to get carpal tunnel. So you do have a bigger gap during contest prep as you're getting leaner, but at the same time, that doesn't mean you need to take more. As you get closer to the final couple weeks, you need to keep an eye on, okay, when I take my growth hormone, how am I looking? If I take the weekends off on Monday, do I look more shredded than ever? Do I hold a lot of sub-Q fluid on growth hormone, or don't I? Most of the fluid retention from growth hormone is held intramuscular, so we want to keep it in, unless if you're that one, or maybe let's say 10% of people who tend to get more subcutaneous fluid retention from your growth hormone. In that case, you drop it out during the last couple of days. Usually 48 to 72 hours is more than enough, but in general, we're keeping growth hormone in throughout the entire time. You can apply this to everything. If it's not causing fluid retention, you keep it in throughout show day. Same with insulin and things like that.
Yeah, okay. I was about to ask this. Okay.
Feel it.
Yeah, because that's like a very frequent asked question. Would you leave the GH, or would you abandon? But actually, so like everything, it depends on how you look, actually. Because if you look great 2 weeks out, actually, it's best to do nothing, basically.
Exactly.
Even the peak week is sometimes unnecessary, to be honest.
The peak week, and we'll get to it, but it's actually super easy. Like the way that I peak people, I'll go over it later on, obviously, but it's very consistent, and we do it that way so that we always produce a physique that's always between 95 and 100%. There's a very short window for screwing that up, and that's what we're trying to do with having a peak week that's consistent. It's nothing crazy, it's just consistent.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so what's the best time to incorporate the fat burners like Clen, Joachimbein, GH fragment, etc.?
I would probably say at the start of contest prep. So if you do that marinating phase properly before that transition from off season to contest prep, you're going to be getting very good at parasympathetic beta oxidation, which again is the ability to lose body fat and use fat for fuel throughout the day. If you're good at PBO, so again, parasympathetic beta oxidation, if you're good at that, then you can start adding these things in right out of the gate and not have any problems. The issue with clenbuterol long-term is a dosage or duration problem. So it's clinically prescribed to like 40 to 60 micrograms for years on end for allergies and things like that in other countries. But in the athletic world, people usually work it up too high or keep it in for too long at too high of a dosage. If it's in the background of 20 micrograms, that's the stimulatory effects of some people as a coffee. Is a coffee every day going to kill you? No. But if you put it at 80 micrograms or 10 cups of coffee over time, that stimulatory effect on cardiac tissue is going to add up. So it's more of a duration dosage problem with Clen. So if you would start it off 12 weeks out at 20 micrograms and keep it there, maybe bump up to 40, then maybe 60, maybe end at 80, there's nothing wrong with that. If you started off at 80 though, and then bumped up to 120, 160, 200, which people do, then you're going to probably run into issues long term.
And what about taking the breaks from the clenbuterol? Because everyone says that the receptors are actually gonna fill up, and you have to do the breaks or take stuff like ketotifen to actually fight with the receptor, like clean the receptor, let's say.
Definitely, yeah. So those beta adrenergic receptors get slightly downregulated, but not completely. So the literature and all the biochemical principles and pathways that people like to talk about are just misconstruing. It's not that they're wrong, they're just misreading it. So if we're at 100% capacity, functional rates, and it's going down to 80, 80 is still functional. You take that week off, you're losing that whole 80% of progress you could be making. They're not, however, like androgen receptors. Androgen receptors, and in basic biology, they only upregulate the more androgens you take. So the more drugs you take, the more androgen receptors you have. And then clenbuterol, you are going to see a little downregulation like with all stimulatory cascades, but not to a significant degree. So for me, I would rather have clenbuterol kept in the background at all times. It's going to be a background driver on mTOR, which maybe is not too much for people that are taking HRT or more blasting. But at the same time, we're going to always have those small cascades of liberate fat, oxidize fat. Liberate fat, oxidize fat. Every day you start off with what? Liberate fat, oxidize fat.
Yeah.
So I'm a very big fan of the small things over day adding up over the course of 12, 20 weeks.
Okay. Yeah, I was never actually big on the making the breaks from the clan, to be honest. So I've always think the same. Yeah, that's like an old thing.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, even for me back in the day, because you read that on paper, you understand it, but you go, there's a lot of people saying this, let me trial it. So you trial it with yourself, with hundreds of clients over the years, you're bringing ketotifen, and it's generally just not needed. The vast majority of people are not going to benefit more out of clenbuterol with ketotifen. Even though it has its place, most people aren't going to need it.
Yeah, and actually ketotifen is sometimes doing more harm than good, to be honest, because people tend to feel the shit on them. So yeah. Okay, so what's the changes in the diet when it comes to prep? You like to cut the carbs first, the fat first, or actually everything is going down in the moderation?
So I would slowly work down fats and carbohydrates first, keeping nitrogen, so protein the same, trying to favor glucose, trying to keep carbohydrates as high as possible. As you're getting towards the tail end, I would much rather have someone keep 150 or 200 grams of carbs in and drop all their fats just to trace what they're getting from their protein sources, than go the opposite and do kind of this low carb and low fat. To me, I would much rather have glucose because that's what athletes are very much more dependent on. Not only that, but again, as enhanced athletes, as we talked about in video one again, which I'll reference again, if you're having your trace fats from your beefs, from your fish, from your eggs, you're still going to be getting anywhere from 20 to like 40 grams, depending on your protein intake, even for females. So to me, that's more than enough to keep all those immunoresponsive cascades online and make sure someone doesn't run into problems with their health come the end of prep. So to me, I'd rather favor protein really isn't in the conversation. It's always staying where it's at, but probably favor more carbohydrates and slowly bring down the fats more.
Okay, did you sometimes increase the protein closer to the show?
Yep, sometimes, yeah, that can actually drive up natural endogenous diuresis. So your ability to stay drier and manage fluids helps a lot. Not only that, but we have that thermic effect of feeding from nitrogen, so you can get a little more action out of that, increases satiety, it does a whole bunch of things. So for certain cases, yeah, you can most definitely do that.
Okay. More cardio and more food, or less cardio and less food? What's your preferred method?
If I had to pick either one,
you can say whatever you want.
Okay, I was gonna say, basically the way I do is I have people operating like a machine. So they are weight training, they're taking their walks outside, they're doing all their cardio, and they're eating higher food if they can. High is relative to the individual, though. And this is where it gets tough. We want to keep people's food as high as possible, as long as we can, while still reaching the goal. For you, that may be 400 grams of carbs. You're still going to feel like crap, but that might be, yeah, you're giving me the face. Other people, though, they may have to go to just a protein-sparing modified fast. No fats, no carbohydrates, only protein and vegetables. So trace carbohydrates. It just depends on the person. And the problem is, too, it's also not muscle mass dependent. I've worked with some of the biggest guys on the Olympia stage, and guess what? They have to protein-spare modified fast all the way to the Olympia stage. Other people up there, they diet on 600 grams of carbs. It's really just dependent on that specific person and that point in their life, because it does change again from diet to diet.
Yeah, that's actually something that's always interests me, because it's maybe slightly depends on the amount of the muscle mass, because the bigger guy is always going to eat more.
Right?
Yeah. But
Yeah.
sometimes it's actually totally opposite. I sometimes have a natural clients that eat like 800 to 900 carbs, and they have a problem to grow actually. Like, and it's not like they do in a 30,000 of steps every day or something like that. They just normally working, sometimes even from their home and barely moving. And sometimes I have clients that's working constructions and actually eat like 400 grams of carbs, 300 grams of protein, 50 grams of fats, and they getting fat as fuck.
Yeah.
So yeah, this basically make no sense, and they both training equally hard. So it's not like one doing nothing and the other one is busting his ass off. Because it's crazy for me, and I don't know how it works. Because basically the studies says like a metabolism between the people is actually quite same. It's maybe like a 5 to 10% difference in between the people, so it's not it shouldn't be as much as a
And see,
difference.
this is where you get into the realm of epigenetics, and it's a conversation that no one will ever win because there's always a caveat. There's a caveat to a caveat and a caveat to that caveat. So no matter what, you get into epigenetics, and it's an interesting as heck conversation. I work with some people right now that literally get literally zero action out of any drug they take. Whether that be warfarin, baby aspirin, trenbolone, they get zero action regardless of the dosage. From a CYP aspect, their livers and their entire CYP system is so, I don't want to say messed up, but it basically is to such a degree that they don't get any action out of almost every single pharmaceutical compound out there. You have other people where they are the hyper responders. They get those nuclear adaptations in a second, like they smell trenbolone and all of a sudden they're, they get smarter and they get bigger and they get healthier. There's people like that. So the epigenetic conversation, and those are the questions I try to answer. Like I'll never be able to really figure them out, but I try to because they're just really interesting to me. It's not always about the application. It's sometimes just about the thought process, But yeah, it's interesting to say the least.
Yeah, sometimes we should just sit and talk about a little bit about this, because it's actually something that's interesting me a lot, and I never get it actually right, even though I read about it like thousands of studies, books, and forum topics. So it's actually very hard to understand.
Here's an even cooler thing. If you want to just think about drugs and genetics, everyone likes to talk about their genetics. The moment you take any kind of pharmaceutical drug, you are forever changing your biology. So if we take androgens, as the example, we understand we have all that floating space out here with your sarcoplasm. We understand we have the DNA in here. We have androgen coming in, receptors, because receptors are not stationary, they float around. Drug finds receptor, docks. It does not click like a key. It literally docks the spaceship. It slowly translocates as a complex to the DNA. And now that it's in this DNA, that's what's driving all the protein transcription. Now the receptor complex comes apart, drug goes find another receptor goes find another drug, and a protein then gets spit out over here, and we start that actual translation process. So the moment you take one shot of testosterone, you are forever changed. That's why they say the muscle memory and all the nuclear adaptations that happen with my nuclear donation and exchange from taking androgens or growth hormones or insulins, things like that, it's a real thing because every single shot, this happens, millions of times in a day? Like that's always happening. So you're changing your genetics forever. And that's a cool conversation because then you see people defying their genetics where they post up a 10-year transformation and beforehand they look like nothing. And all of a sudden they look like this IFBB monster pro. That's how that can happen. It's really cool.
Yeah, and this is why you can never be a natural bodybuilder again.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You're never truly natural again.
Yeah.
So all 60-year bands and CrossFit and all that fun stuff, like you are forever changed. So it's not really a level playing field anymore.
I basically know the answer right now because you say it back like a few times, but what's your preferred method of the cardio, let's say, the steady states, the HIIT, or the counting steps?
All. So moderation of all, pretty much. So we talked about this again in the first video. That's what you're referencing.
Yeah.
For bodybuilders, though, as you're getting leaner towards the stage, you're not going to be able to keep up with that amount of intensity work because you still need to save something in the tank for your actual weight training. So HIIT's going to come down most likely. Low intensity steady state's going to most likely go up to bridge that gap in aerobic enzymes. And then your PBO walks can kind of stay the same or maybe slightly go up more depending on where your drugs are at and where your food's at. We could do something like taking those walks outside. So you could break it up very simple. On a training day, you do low intensity cardio. On a rest day, you do a walk outside. Very simple, two different ways to lose body fat. One is more sympathetic, one is more parasympathetic. That parasympathetic walk outside, you could do half an IU or 1 IU of insulin to clear blood glucose, a little bit of carnitine to drive up that lubing process of beta oxidation, and you can lose a lot of fat just by walking outside. Same amount of fat you're going to get from doing your 45 minutes on the Stairmaster, but it's just doing different systems. So depending on where the drugs are at, that would change the conversation. But no matter what, usually HIIT stays in, it goes lower, maybe dropped out depending on the person, especially as people get bigger, like IFBB pros just can't move that fast. You don't want to risk an injury. So maybe in that scenario, they're so genetically gifted, they don't have to do that in the first place. So we may drop that out completely, but we're still keeping in our walks and our actual low intensity.
Yeah, and you actually tend to save your legs a little bit more if you're doing a less intense cardio. I tend to see that in the most of the clients that they actually burning more of the quads, especially especially if that's not the best part of it.
That's a major caveat. So I appreciate you saying that. I have all of my athletes do upper body, high intensity interval training, nothing lower body. Lower body is going to most likely flatten out the legs and drives more of that spinal cord pressure. So it's going to most likely tax your central nervous system more. So those assault bikes and things like that, they wipe you out forever if you're doing true HIIT versus if you do like the arm ergometers or if you're doing like boxing or rowing or things like that. They don't have the same central nervous system taxing capabilities. So you can get away with not losing any kind of precious muscle tissue fullness or anything like that if you just switch to an upper body workout or upper body HIIT style workout.
Okay, and the favorite questions of all of the listeners probably. You prefer to do the cheat meals or the refeed days as needed in the contest prep?
Whatever they need. If they are the person who is getting mentally burnt out, it's the deflux cheat meal, like we talked about in the first video. If they are someone who's just getting physically burnt out, it's the G-flux, glucose fluxing, high carbohydrate meal that we talked about in the first video. But either or works completely fine. As you get to the final 6 weeks, though, you need to know how you're going to peak. So you're most likely going to switch to a high carbohydrate day, just so you have consistency. Certain people can do the cheat meals the night before the show, but I don't like that as being an unknown variable because if you travel to a show, it's different food, different environment, things like that. We're most likely going to end on a high carbohydrate approach, just so we know how someone actually peaks.
Okay. So right now I have a peak week right before me. So the question is, how much more time you have?
Oh, I'm good. We can talk.
Yeah, okay, because I have a 15 quick questions, so we should make it like 30 to 45 minutes, I think, and we're gonna be done. Okay, so the pick week. The first question we already answered, but I have to ask it once again. Do you cut the GH before competition? And if the answer is yes, how long before? And I asking this in regards to the reaction of your client. So if he's actually holding the water, how long before the show you're gonna cut the GH? And if he's not holding the water, it's actually basically stayed the same. So this doesn't matter actually.
Correct. Yeah. So 3 days out, 72 hours before the show is usually perfect because the way that I peak is a depletion and a rapid backload. So we're bringing in carbohydrates the final 2 days. So that means on the third day, you're dropping that growth hormones. You can lose fluid faster on that day. In the final 2 days, you're pulling any subcutaneous fluid into actual myocytes in intramuscular compartments.
Okay. Do you cut the test or lower it as much as possible before the show?
Nope, no need. Same kind of thing with the growth hormone. If it's giving you all that fullness that you got from testosterone, we want to keep that fullness. But if you are having an estrogen-based problem where you're noticing a little bit more, like if your testosterone is at 750 plus or something, you may want to err on the side of caution and bring in a little bit of Arimidex, something like 0.5 milligram every 2 days. throughout peak week, or usually more than enough. The problem is you cannot completely tank estrogen because then you run into issues with actual glycogen storage. So you want to modulate and manage estrogen, but not completely tank it if you can help it. It's not going to kill you at the end of the day, especially because it's such a brief stint in time. But in general, keep testosterone the same. If there's an estrogen problem, just fix that with an AI.
Yeah, of course. How long before the show you start to leveling up the water and sodium intake? Because some coaches doing it like 2 weeks before, some even earlier. So what's your approach?
Yeah, so this is the final 7 days. If we're looking at endogenous, natural, circadian-based diuresis, so how our body moves fluid throughout our system a 24-hour period, we're looking at that happen within a 7-day period. So the way that it looks is glucose, ions, and fluids have to be inverse. So we have our water, our fluid, and then ions. When I say ions, I'm talking about our calcium, magnesium, potassium, sodium, and chloride and magnesium-based ions. I said magnesium, calcium. I say that already. Either way, there's 6 of them.
Yeah.
You're focusing on fluxing these ions. This is where you need to know your diuretics and how they're working. If we're looking at a diazide or a Lasix or an aldactone, they're doing 3 completely different things in terms of what they're wasting, what they're building up, and where they're working. So I know this is more than what you asked, but it's really important. If you look at a nephron, so it's the smallest functional unit of a kidney. We have our glomerulus over here. We have like a tube that goes down, up, and then back down again. Over here is the proximal convoluted tubule. Goes down the loop of Henle. So we have the descending limb up into the ascending limb. That's where Lasix works. And then up here into the proximal or the distal convoluted tubule, that's where diazide works. And then comes down here into the early and late collecting ducts. That's where aldactone works in the early collecting duct. So Lasix works here, diazide works up here, and aldactone works over here. Because of that, Lasix is going to be the thing that can work 20 to 30% from a diuretic action. Diazide's more about 10%, and aldactone's at about like 2 or 3%. So what that means is you can waste fluid like crazy with Lasix. You get less total diuretic action from diazide and almost no diuretic action out of aldactone, but aldactone builds potassium reserves. So this is just important to understand your ions. So in this kind of paradigm, how we do it is glucose starts off low throughout peak week. So we deplete days 7 through 3, and we bring it up and increase it days 2 days out and 1 day out, and then obviously on competition day. So it's depletion, then repletion. At the same time, ions and fluids have to be started higher, and then slowly, well, actually from day 7 to 3, they're kept higher. Then they're brought slowly down as we actually fill up on glucose. What this is doing is we are filling out and teaching our body how to supercompensate to store more glycogen. We are matching our body's circadian diuresis. So we're getting good at driving natural endogenous diuresis about those, whether that be 7 to 3 days. So whatever, 5 days. I'm bad at math, by the way. And then we are also preparing our body to be ready to be receptive to the pharmaceutical diuretics coming in, because again, they're working from a nephron aspect, not the way that natural endogenous diuresis works. So I know that was a lot, but that's how we're basically looking at the peak week being set up. We're depleting from days 7 through 3, and then day 2, we start our backload, 1 day out, more carbohydrates, and then show day, we actually just top off because we dry out overnight.
Okay, you basically answered the next questions. How long before you start manipulating the water and sodium? But actually, do you cut the water or sodium completely?
No, you never cut it completely out because glucose follows what? Fluid and ions. Yep. So if you have all these things going through your bloodstream, and the way that pharmaceutical diuretics work is they pull from blood volume first, then muscular volume, then subcutaneous. So what does that sound like? We need to lose this to step on stage. But the problem is you have to lose everything else first. So overnight on show day, if it's a Saturday show, Friday night, what we're doing is pulling from blood volume, muscular volume, and subcutaneous volume. We're waking up all the way back here. So you were flat as heck, but you were dry as all hell. All you need to do at that point is restore blood volume and muscular volume and step on stage before restoring subcutaneous volume. It sounds complicated, but it's really not. You're doing 3 steps overnight and only doing 2 steps the next day. So you're timing it right before you actually go ahead and restore subcutaneous volume. And all that looks like is having just enough ions, fluids, and glucose to, like I say, top off, to literally top off your stores and just be able to actually show off what you have.
Okay, you talk a lot about diuretics. Do you sometimes pick your clients without diuretics, or you always use them even in a minimal form?
So I prefer pharmaceutical diuretics because they are so effective, they're so efficient, they're so reliable. There's a reason why there was what, like 5 or 8 million prescriptions for Lasix in 2021, I believe was the number. Either way, they're very effective and very safe to use if you know what you're doing. Now, at the same time, though, certain people just don't need them. So 100%, if it's someone's first show and maybe you don't know them very well, or maybe, maybe health is kind of a concern, or you're just not sure how they're going to respond, or maybe they have blood pressure or renal-based problems, we do not want to use a diuretic. Most people, though, they can get away with using a pharmaceutical diuretic at a very, very, very low dosage. That's where people screw up and not have a problem.
Okay, and what is your choice of use when it comes to the diuretics?
So you have 2 routes you can go. You either go the diazide route or aldactone and Lasix. Aldactone and Lasix has to be together because Lasix wastes potassium, aldactone builds it up. So you would build up potassium reserves day 7 through basically 3 days out, nothing day 2 out unless you need a little bit of Lasix, and really then bring in Lasix at 1 day out. So you can have extra potassium to waste.
Yeah.
Diazide, that's pretty idiot proof. It's literally the night before the show. It's that simple.
Oh, you started cut off. Are you there? Alex, you there?
Still there?
You cut off
Yeah,
for
a little
moment.
frozen.
Yeah, you cut off for a moment, but I hear you. Can you hear
You're
me?
frozen on my screen.
Yeah, you're frozen as well as on mine, but actually I hear you pretty well.
Can you
So
hear me?
yeah, I hear you pretty well.
There we go.
Okay, I think we have all of our records. Yeah, it's still recording. Okay, we're good. Okay. Ooh, I was scared as hell. Okay, so the first diuretic used, you say, is actually more dangerous. So let's say it right away that it's for the very advanced competitors, and always with the jurisdiction of the pretty advanced and knowledgeable coach. And the second one, the diazide, is actually more safer. So for those who doing it for the first time or doing it by themselves, it's probably the better to go with the diazide. It's actually more predictable. So the diazide is always like a choice that's better for majority of the people, I would say. Yeah. Did you agree?
Yes, but no, because Lasix gets the worst rap out there. The problem with it is that it can just waste until you have a problem, whereas diazide and aldactone gets capped with diuresis. Now, with Lasix, we're literally talking about, for a first-time competitor, 5 or 10 milligrams. You have a 40 milligram tablet, you have to break it up and literally get little dusts of powder in your fingers. It's nothing, but it drives so much diuresis. So it's not that it is an unsafe drug. It's just that the magnitude of effect is so high. So I feel like most people go, oh, it's a tablet, I'll take a full one, and they're screwing up on the dosage side of things. But in general, yeah, you have to know what you're doing if you're ever going to play with diuretics at all.
Yeah, actually, I was more concerned about the potassium things, because people tend to don't get it that you actually can stop your heart. So it's very, very dangerous and sometimes people even take extra potassium. Yes,
and let me say that too really quickly. So if we're understanding that gradient that exists, we have our intracellular space, extracellular space, and all the other fun stuff out here we don't have to worry about. Potassium's in here. Sodium and chloride ions are out here. If you are taking in additional extra salt, so you're salting all your food, that's sodium chloride. So you have sodium ions and chloride ions. If you also add potassium to that, what are you doing? You're filling up both places. No gradient can happen because there's no positive and negative. If you were just salting your food and not adding additional potassium from food, all of a sudden potassium's low, sodium, chloride ions out here can actually be shifted in, and that's how that gradient works. So you should never be adding additional exogenous potassium from food or pills or anything. If anything, you're just conserving it from aldactone, but that's a very small dosage. All these dosages, and this is not for the IFBB Pro, dosages over there we're not going to talk about. For the general competitor or even high-tier national level competitor, 25, 50 milligrams of aldactone, every day, from day 7 day out to 3 day out, something like that, and then maybe 10 to 20 milligrams of Lasix. That's a very small tame dosage that no one's going to have problems with. The problem is, like you said, people just decide to not use the aldactone and just don't use the Lasix, or they use too much, and that's where they run into problems. So no matter what, don't take it if you don't know what you're doing. And that goes as a disclaimer for all drugs. But to me, you should be an adult and kind of invest in the right coach, the right person, or at least have some kind of an understanding about how things work before you use them.
Yeah, in the perfect world scenario, that's probably how it looked like, but we all know that's barely ever happens. So most of the people first do something, then think, and that's the recipe for the disaster.
Yeah. So then, like you said, if that's the case, because that actually is reality, let's make it idiot proof and take a tab of diazide. Literally, if you do a quarter tablet, because most people are going to have access to the same size milligram tablets, that'd be what, about 12.5 milligrams. So literally a quarter tablet of diazide night before the show. You're going to have no issues. You're going to wake up a little bit flat, but very dry. You top off stores a little bit with just enough glucose, just enough fluid, and just enough salt. Because remember, we're adding salt, which is sodium and chloride ions. You're good to go.
Yeah, and actually, this is the next question I would like to ask. What are your preferably way of the carb up? So how long before the show you start? You say like 2 days before. So it's like, let's say it's going to be a Thursday and Friday, and on Saturday we have a show. So would you, okay, let's say how you do it firstly, and I will ask the question next.
Definitely, yeah. So first of all, we are looking at their response to refeeds throughout the prep. So if you realize, like let's say I was working with you and you always ate 2 carb days back to back, higher carb days, one was 1,000 grams of carbs, the next one was 750. I'm actually using these numbers because I just put together a peak week for one of my clients. And you have those numbers and you know that you always responded well to that. Well, now you have to take into account the fact that we're depleting for a couple of days beforehand. So things are going to have to be a little bit higher. Excuse me, things are going to have to be a little bit higher. So now we go to maybe 1,100 and maybe 850. So maybe you add an extra 100 grams of carbs to each day, but always start off with higher amounts. So we have the lower amount, less of a chance for any spillover. So that first day out, 2 days out, when we start loading carbohydrates at the higher amount, and you can even go with maybe a 60-40 split or something like that, depending on what you need. You'd add up the total amount and then divide it 60-40. Higher amount 2 days out, lower amount 1 day out, and then we dry out over the night. We wake up the next morning, and again, you're super flat, but at the same time, you're as dry as you need to be. You don't need much fluid, ions, and glucose to restore the blood volume and subcutaneous volume. So that's where you're bringing in meals every 2 hours. And it can be something as simple as, because I like to go with essential amino acids on show day instead of actual protein. On show day, we don't need more nitrogen. That's something that generally just gets in the way of digestive tract assimilation. We just don't want the chance to bloat. So if we have essential amino acids, those act as signaling molecules to say, hey, where do I live? I live in myocytes, I live in muscle cells. Let's take all the glucose with me. So you can picture them as just being the little aid to make sure all glucose is going into your muscle cells. So it could literally look like every 2 hours, 10 grams of essential amino acids, maybe 5 if you're a female, but maybe you're on the side of caution and go with 10, you can. And then your allotted amount of glucose that you need. So 20 to 50 grams of carbohydrates, depending on the person, and then the specific amounts of fluid and sodium that you actually need at those meals as well. And you're doing that every 2 hours. And then before the stage, you could do some things that I like to do, like you have a big hit of sodium, you get that massive retention, intramuscular, that massive swelling, a good pump product, and you're pretty much good to go.
Okay. Do you often let your guys carb up on junk food, or lean carbs is only the preferably way?
Yep, I like people to use the exact same sources they use throughout the entire prep. So if it was oatmeal and pasta or rice, like they've had those high carb days before, if it was bread or even junk food beforehand that I didn't know about or whatever, if that's what worked before, that's what's going to work during peak week. So don't change the variable.
Okay. Okay. You basically said that before, but what about the food on the show day, actually?
Yeah. So same kind of thing. So the carbohydrate sources are always what we know we respond best to and digest well. The biggest issue people do is they change up sources because they want to optimize digestion. But you should have already figured that out the last 12 weeks during prep. So we stick with those. The only thing you would have in there is maybe like 30 minutes before the stage, like a highly branched cyclic dextrose, some high molecular weight carbohydrate, carb 10, carbol, and they're all basically the same. They're not the same thing actually at all, but they're close enough. Have that with your EAAs, with your pump formula, with a big hit of sodium and a very small amount of fluid, really just enough to get it down. It turns into like this sludgy concoction, which is disgusting, but you swell up like no one's business. So that's generally how I like to put it.
Okay. And what in the case of a 2 days show? Because sometimes we have like a show on a Saturday, let's say it's like a regionals, and on a Sunday we have like a pro qualifier, for example. So always the second day is going to be more important, because that's obvious actually, because we're shooting for the pro card. So what's in case of this scenario? How would you work it out?
Yep. So super simple because that's how they do the Olympia, obviously. You need to do the exact same thing that we did, but the night of that first show, you need to spill over. You need to wake up the next day spilled because if not, you have no wiggle room. So remember what we did. We went from driving all of these glycogen synthase-based factors to store, to be hyper lean, to be very dry for that one specific day. So you can't go back anymore, right? Or else you're going to run into problems with being chronically flat. You're going to get that stringy look, and then you just look depleted. We don't want that. So you compete on that first day. You have a bigger carb up that night. You dry out again over that night into the second day. You wake up the next day, and all you do is top off less. So the big thing here is you have to spill the day of that first show. After you're done, after you get off of prejudging, you spill immediately. So your body has time to start storing things to pull down that systemic burden, because being dehydrated for longer than 24 hours, obviously you start running into issues from a physique-based aspect. And then the next one, you kind of do the same thing again, but like at a muted level. Does that make sense?
Yeah, okay. So what about competing back to back, actually? If we have a competition like a week after week, how do you manage this?
So same kind of thing like the 2-day show, but on a much grander scale. So if you were to do just the 1-day show, and then you're competing the next weekend or the following weekend, after that first show, you have to have a bigger spill, usually the competition night and the following day. So think of it as like a 36-hour, because you're obviously usually not getting off stage until later at night. You have a massive meal that night. You have a massive meal the next day. Don't go crazy on the ions and fluids, but just enough to make sure everything's getting assimilated, and you're going right back into another peak week. But the only difference now is with this peak week, with how you deplete, you may have to add in carbohydrates to your actual intra-workout shake, whereas beforehand, we would actually pull those out so we could actually deplete it. So the whole reason we do that and train in that depleted fashion is to drive up glycogen synthase. So it's not so much glycogen depletion as it is glycogen future upregulation. It's arguing with words, but that's really what we're trying to do there. Yeah. So we're trying to prepare you to get ready to super compensate. So it'd be that process again, but less depletion because you've already done it once. And you would just be tweaked and modulated if you do 4 shows back to back. The most I ever had one guy do was at the pro level, and it's like 5 shows. He was so beaten down by the end of it. I felt so bad. Like, peaking's hard enough to do on someone once or twice on their body. It's not hard to do hard on them physically. If you've ever done it, you know what I'm talking about. But to do it 4 times, 5 times, like, you got to really be able to take a lot of crap and deal with a lot of stuff to do that.
Yeah, I do the 11 shows actually back to back. I have like 1 week that I have 2 weeks between the shows, and most of the rest of the shows is actually back to back. And it was like sometimes I'm go on a stage like 2 to 3 times in a day, because in Poland we have the possibility to compete, for example, in a classic and then in a weight category. So sometimes I do the both, and that was actually nightmare at the end. I basically hate come on a stage, to be honest, and I was like miserable. Yeah, but actually that was pretty cool experience, and I probably won't do this again, but it was cool actually. Okay, so we come out of the prep here. We win or lose, that doesn't matter. We have to do something after all of the systemic fatigue we collect through all of the competing, because we prepare for like a 12 weeks, then we probably compete for 6 weeks or sometimes maybe 8 weeks. Depends on how the shows are actually scheduled. So what you do after the compete season, if the athlete is kind of fresh, he's not fresh because he's beat as hell, but you know how the athletes works, especially in his brains. He's always he eats like a burger, and now he's a new man. So you like to do the health phase or rebound after the competition?
So like you said, depending on where they're at, how fresh they are, how healthy they are, and what the future goals are, it's either going to be a 6 to 8 week rebound phase, or more of a transition into the off season where no matter what that, like, so let's do the transition first. We would stop taking all drugs. You drop everything for the first week. The reason why we're doing that is to bring androgen levels back down. So peak plasma concentrations, if you miss an injection for a week, they're not going to plummet. That's not how they work. But they start to come down a lot faster. So we can stop taking anything for that first week and just be a human. I tell people after a show, eat, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, train if you want to, but just be a human and relax. Spend more time with your family or watching TV. Literally just relax. You just gave your life to this for 12, 20 weeks. Give it some time. You have that week off, you come back, then we hit it freezing hard. Athletic HRT comes in, food starts to come up, the new mesocycle starts, and we start growing normally. Whole goal is to always grow as lean, as healthy as possible. On the opposite side, if the person stayed fresh, maybe they only did one show, maybe whatever, they could just physically take so much of a beating, that person would say, okay, we're going to elevate and keep those androgens on the higher end, but we're going to pull out all the fat burners, start working up food, start working down cardio, and give them that 6 to 8 weeks to rebound, because rebounding is a very real thing. And it's just the fact that we are at such a unique position. It's this biologically crossing-based world where HRV is high, heart rate's low, blood pressure is usually low. You're as healthy as you can not healthy as you can possibly be, but energetically you're as fit as you can be because you're so lean. So you can drive up a lot of anabolism in that 6 to 8 window, but that's only if you can handle it. In reality, and people probably don't want to hear this, but that's probably only 20% of people. Probably 20% of people should rebound, and the other 80% should probably transition. Like, that's the reality. So most people should most likely take health first. And we're getting blood work done the first week after the show because we're trying to see just how stressed out your system was.
Okay, this was actually my big belief is in the capabilities of the body to grow after the show, because most people right now says that after the show is not the best time for growth because the body is beat up and you actually stressed and metabolically you are not prone to grow and stuff like that. And I actually don't believe it, because even though I'm always beat up after the competition, I've always do the rebound phase. And on average, I'm getting like a 7 to 8 kilos year after year. So that's, for my average genetics, pretty good, I think. So if the rebound is actually bullshit, that will probably won't happen.
And that's the thing, that so it goes back to what I said, where it's literally both. It's more, which situation are you in? For you, I've seen your pictures on Instagram. Your genetics are on the higher end of normal. I'm kind of mid-tier, and then because just from a muscle belly, I'm not sure how you respond to drugs or nutrition or all that fun stuff, but from a pure muscle belly insertion standpoint, you have those insertions, you have those muscle bellies. Clearly, that post-rebound response shows that how you dismantle these drugs is better than most other people. So since you get that response, you would be stupid to say, oh, the science says this. No, if that's what's happening in reality, you go with what actually works. As much as I love research, I've read more books than anyone. I've read more research than anyone, but it doesn't matter if it doesn't work in application. So you need to have book smarts, you need to keep up with your research, but you have to rely on experience and application. Your application says you put on that consistently, so you keep doing that 100%.
Yeah, this is my biggest belief.
Yep.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that other people are going to respond that same way. So as long as you have that caveat in the back of your head, okay, this response can happen, doesn't happen to everyone, but I'll keep an eye out for when it does happen, because then we can push that and really exploit that.
Okay, you basically covered the next questions about the drugs, training, diet after the show, talking about the both of the scenario you like to do. So I'm not going to ask you again, but it's not maybe related certainly to the end of the prep. But do you think that come off completely is necessary for the competitors, or competitors actually never come off completely, like a proper PCT and stuff like that?
So this is tough, because I truly believe that if you decide to go on, you should basically be on for life. If you're deciding to take androgens, that's something you're going to be on for life. Yes, you can come on, come off, come on, come off. But the vast majority of people don't respond very well to that. They go through these big peaks and valleys that are even worse for you than if you just kept steady level. Sorry about that. So in my world, I really feel like people should, because the difference between being natural or being on TRT and athletic HRT, the differences in health are very minimal, not to mention the difference in quality of life. Once you start blasting, that's whenever health changes and goes out the window to a certain degree. So in my world, I really feel like PCT shouldn't be a thing. It's fine that people do it. I'm not against it or anything, but if you are choosing to inject yourself and go to this extent with performance-enhancing drugs, you're probably going to be on it for life for males. For females, you almost have the same thing with female athletic HRT, where they go through different cycles of different orals, different thyroids, different clenbuterols, and they start seeing testosterone, estrogen, progesterone-based issues. Then they have to have their own form of athletic HRT, where it could be an exogenous estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. So in that scenario, I don't see why males or females wouldn't stay on it for life when you're getting a better quality of life and basically no negatives when it comes to health. It's only improving you because you're staying at steady levels. That's what I think.
Okay. Okay, and last questions for today. Do you like your guys doing a breaks from the gym, like a totally breaks from time to time?
Yeah, so like we talked about before with the deloads, it's usually every 16th week. It can be anywhere from 12 to 20, like we said before, but it's either going to be a whole week completely out of the gym, or you go into the gym for that week, but you're cutting volume in half. So you're doing the bare minimum. You just go get a pump and come out. That just goes back to systemic fatigue. You can't go 100% year-round as much as you want to. That's how people run into tearing muscles or running into issues with even life. As much as we want to think that we're all, the best athlete out there, we all have families, we all have jobs, we all have to make money, we all have to responsibilities, we got to pay taxes and stuff like that. So you have to kind of blend your athletic career with life. And at some point, you're going to need that week you spend less time in the gym, most likely.
Okay. Okay, thank you so much, Alex. Actually, we go through all of the questions I have listed for today, and you actually do for us a little bit of a course, basically for free. So it's very, very cool that you joined to the podcast and you actually take your time from your life to spoke a little bit about your coaching and your methods, because actually that's something that more of the people should actually know about, because you're actually one of the most knowledgeable guy actually, and I almost feel like I know you just because I don't know if you know this, but I'm always watching your lives and asking a shit ton of questions and try to steal your informations for free, like a I don't say what.
No, good. Again, everyone, I put out all this free content for people to absorb, to take, to become better coaches. I've had people message me and say that they built a coaching career just off of watching my free stuff. How cool is that? People leaving their 9-to-5 job, doing what they love, and I was a part of that. So, like, I just appreciate you having me on. I absolutely love that you do that. That's why I try and post more of my story, because people like it. It kind of blows my mind that people like knowing about my life and what I'm doing, what my kids are doing. But since people like it, I love sharing it. So it really is my honor. I appreciate you having me on.
Okay, so for all of the listeners, just to give a little bit back from us to the Alex, in the description box below, you gotta find all of the links to his books, to his coaching site, and to his Instagram. And if you wanted to be a better coach, you wanted to be a better athlete, you wanted to learn some free stuff, maybe just go and research through all of the Alex books and stuff that he makes for us, because that's like a worth weight in gold actually. So that's it. If you're here, please click on the notification bells, subscribe, comment, like, share, and let the whole world know that we speak today with the Alex.
I love it, man. Again, thank you for having me on. And everyone, thank you for taking the time to listen. I'm very verbose and I usually go off on tangents. It's just because I love this so much. So thanks again.
Thank you so much and have a nice day, man.
Definitely, brother.
Bye.